Chapter 1. The Proposition. The king was not staring at his ex-courtship across the great hall. He was surveying the room. There was a difference, and the difference mattered, and anyone who suggested otherwise would find themselves reassigned to the northern watchtower, where the wind came sideways and the food was exclusively turnip-based. "You're staring," Mott said. Desmond Ironclaws, Alpha King of the Greypeak Dominion, did not dignify this with a response. He lifted his goblet, drank, set it down with the precise amount of force that communicated, "I am at ease and enjoying this feast enormously." Mott, who had served as captain of the King's Guard for 11 years and had long since stopped being impressed by goblet technique, said nothing further. He didn't need to. He simply looked at the same spot Desmond was not looking at, which was the east alcove, where Faye Ashmore was laughing at something her new mate had said. Her new mate was tall, though not as tall as Desmond, and not as broad, because nobody in the Greypeak Dominion was as broad as Desmond, which was a fact that should have been comforting and was not. The man had an easy laugh. He touched the small of Faye's back when they moved through the crowd, and she leaned into it without thinking, the way you lean into something that's been there long enough to trust. He looked comfortable, at ease. The kind of relax that Desmond, who had never once in his life been relaxed in a room full of people, had catalogued and resented approximately 9 times since the man had walked in. They looked happy. This was, Desmond decided, profoundly inconsiderate of them. Her. The word surfaced from somewhere low and still. Not about Faye. Brace, his wolf, had been restless all evening, but not in the direction Desmond expected. The wolf's attention kept sliding sideways, catching on something at the edge of the room like a current pulling against the tide. Desmond ignored it. He had a situation to manage. "The Vernal Court reception is in 4 days," he said to Mott, still not looking at the east alcove. "The treaty summit after that. She'll be at both." "She will." "With him." "Also yes." Desmond stopped, recalibrated. He was not going to say, "I need to not look like the king whose courtship left him for someone with better shoulders." That was not a sentence a king said out loud. The optics require adjustment. Mott's expression did not change. Mott's expression rarely changed. It existed in a narrow band between professionally neutral and, "I am documenting this for my eventual memoir." "You want a decoy," Mott said. "I want a courtship. A visible one. Someone appropriate, someone the court will take seriously, someone who'll make Faye Ashmore wish she'd stayed." "That is not what I said." "It's what you mean, sire." Desmond's jaw tightened. His wolf stirred again, that sideways pull, insistent, unhelpful. He pushed it down. "I need someone politically literate," he said. "Someone who understands court protocol, won't be overwhelmed by the attention, and won't develop expectations. You need someone who will pretend to be your mate and not fall in love with you." "Yes." "Have you considered that most people find you difficult?" "Extensively. It's my primary qualification for this plan." Mott almost smiled. Almost. The muscles twitched and then thought better of it. "Hugh Greer's daughter is here tonight. Back row, near the second pillar. She's been reading a book behind her napkin for the last hour." Desmond turned. Petra Greer was, in fact, reading behind her napkin. It wasn't even a good disguise. The book was clearly visible above the linen, and she was turning pages with the focused efficiency of someone who had decided that a feast celebrating the Spring Alliance was a waste of a perfectly good evening. She was wearing a dress that suggested her attendance had been mandatory, and her posture suggested her compliance had been grudging. He'd seen her before. At council sessions, standing behind her father. At formal dinners, seated at the far end where the advisor's household was placed. Close enough to the crown to matter, far enough to be invisible. He'd never spoken to her directly. She existed in the peripheral architecture of his court, always present, never requiring attention. "Her," Brace said again. Desmond frowned. The wolf's focus had sharpened, not the restless drift from before, but something locked, something aimed. Brace was very still, the kind of still that preceded movement. Not now, Desmond thought. He needed to concentrate. He crossed the hall. Petra didn't look up until his shadow fell across the page, and even then she finished the sentence she was on before raising her eyes. Your Majesty? She didn't stand, she didn't curtsy. She bookmarked her page with one finger and looked at him with the patient expression of someone who'd been interrupting kings since she was tall enough to reach the council table's biscuit tray. Miss Greer? If this is about my father's trade proposal, he's over by the wine table arguing with Lord Elmsford about grain tariffs, and I promise you, whatever he's saying, he's right and Elmsford is not. It's not about the trade proposal. Then I'm intrigued because you have never in 11 years spoken to me about anything else. Desmond blinked. This was technically true. He had, in fact, only ever addressed her as an extension of her father's portfolio, which suddenly seemed like an oversight of considerable proportion. Up close, Petra Greer had steady gray eyes and a face that was doing something quietly devastating with the candlelight. Her hair was dark, pinned up in a way that suggested she'd done it herself and hadn't cared much about the result. And this was, he noticed with some alarm, more interesting to look at than it had any right to be. Closer, Brace said. Desmond did not move closer. He sat down across from her, which was as close as protocol allowed without invitation. Petra watched him do this with the mild curiosity of a woman who had seen a great many powerful men sit down uninvited and had developed a scoring system. I have a proposition, he said. I'm reading. It's important. So is Chapter 9. Lady Harwick just discovered the forged letter. Miss Greer, she sighed, closed the book, gave him her full attention, which turned out to be a more intense experience than he'd prepared for. Petra Greer's full attention was like standing in a clear beam of light, nothing hidden, nothing diffused, the kind of focus that saw exactly what was in front of it. I need someone to attend the Vernal Court reception and the Treaty Summit as my courtship partner, he said, visibly, convincingly, for approximately 2 weeks. Why? The political optics of, I can see Faye Ashmore from here, Your Majesty. She's wearing the green. Her new mate is the tall one who keeps touching her back. You're embarrassed. Why are you telling me this instead of just saying that? Something in his chest compressed. Not pain. Surprise. He was not accustomed to being read this quickly by someone who was not Mott. Fine. I'm embarrassed. Better. And you want me to pretend to be what, exactly? Your beloved? Your political match? Your arm decoration? My courtship. A real one, as far as the court knows. We attend events together, we're seen together, we behave as though this is a genuine pursuit. After the summit, we quietly let it dissolve. No expectations, no complications. Petra looked at him for a long time. Her expression was unreadable, which Desmond found both impressive and slightly unnerving because his expression was also supposed to be unreadable, and he had the growing suspicion that his wasn't working.
She smells like rain, Brace said. And ink. And something underneath that I need to be closer to identify. You don't need to identify anything, Desmond thought firmly. This is a transaction. Closer, Brace repeated. What's in it for me, Petra said. What do you want? Access to the restricted archive in the North Wing. My father's been petitioning for a research pass for 3 years. Your predecessor denied it, and you never revisited the decision. Done. Her eyebrows lifted, just slightly. That was fast. It's an archive, not a military secret. It contains the original Grey Peak territorial surveys, the founding pact treaties, and, allegedly, a handwritten account of the first Alpha's courtship of his mate, which, if it exists, would be the oldest surviving document in the Dominion. You want to read a 1,000-year-old love letter. I want to verify whether a 1,000-year-old love letter exists, which is a fundamentally different intellectual exercise. But yes. Desmond stared at her. She stared back. Her wolf. He could feel it now, a distant shimmer at the edge of his awareness,
The way all wolves registered other wolves in proximity was remarkably still. Not the predator still of Brace, a different quality. Calm, unhurried, like moonlight on water that wasn't going anywhere. 2 weeks, he said, starting at the vernal reception. I'll have the archive pass sent to your quarters tomorrow. Petra picked her book back up. I'll need a list of the events, times, dress codes, and which courtiers I should avoid insulting. I'll have Mott prepare it. Good. Was there anything else? He realized he'd been dismissed. By a woman sitting in the back row of his own feast, holding a novel with one finger still marking chapter 9. It was such a cleanly executed dismissal that he almost admired it. He stood. Miss Greer? Your Majesty. She was already reading again. She turned a page without seeing it. She should tell her father. That was the sensible thing. Hugh would want to know. Hugh would have opinions. Hugh would sit her down and list every way this could go sideways in his careful, thorough, exhausting way. But the thought passed through her and kept going, the way most thoughts about her own decisions did. It was 2 weeks. It was minor. It was not the kind of thing that warranted a conversation, because Petra Greer's choices had never been the kind of thing that warranted conversations. She went back to chapter 9. Desmond walked back to where Mott was standing. Mott was watching him with the expression of a man who had just witnessed something he would be describing to his wife in great detail later that evening. She said yes, Desmond said. I know. I could see her not curtsying from here. Brace, in the lowest part of Desmond's chest, was quiet now. Not restless, not pulling sideways. Just settled. Pointed at the second pillar near the back of the hall, where a woman was reading a book and not thinking about him at all. Her, Brace said. Simple. Certain. The way an animal knows where water is. Desmond told himself this was irrelevant. Chapter 2. The Performance. The vernal court reception was held in the Iron Claw's throne room, which was the kind of space that had been designed to make people feel small, and had been succeeding at this for 600 years. Stone columns, banners, enough candlelight to illuminate a minor war. Petra arrived on time, which was already more than Desmond had managed with Faye, who had been constitutionally incapable of arriving anywhere before the third course. She was wearing a deep blue dress that fit properly, not the mandatory attendance dress from the feast, and her hair was down, which Desmond had not seen before, and which turned out to be a problem he had not anticipated. Her hair was dark and heavy, and it moved when she moved, and Brace, who had been a model of restraint for the 36 hours since the feast, went very still. That, Brace said. That what? That. This was not helpful. Desmond straightened his jacket and crossed the antechamber to meet her. Petra looked up at him, scanned his outfit, and said, You look like you're about to negotiate a trade embargo. I'm wearing formal court dress. Yes, that's the problem. She reached up and, without asking, without hesitating, tugged the collar of his jacket a 1/4 inch to the left. Her fingers brushed his throat. The touch lasted perhaps 2 seconds. Brace detonated. Not loudly, not visibly, but somewhere behind Desmond's sternum, his wolf went from still to focused, to something that didn't have a word in any language Desmond spoke. It was the feeling of a predator that had been tracking from a distance and had just been handed the scent point blank. His eyes flashed. He felt it, the hot amber push behind his pupils, there and gone in under a second. Petra's hand was already back at her side. She was looking at the door to the throne room. Your wolf just reacted to a collar adjustment, she said. Mild, observational. The tone of a woman noting weather. He didn't. Your eyes went gold. Briefly. For a fake courtship, your wolf seems to have missed the briefing. She said it lightly, too lightly, the careful lightness of someone who has clocked something significant and is choosing, for now, to file it as comedy rather than deal with what it actually means. The corner of her mouth did something that suggested the filing was temporary. Shall we? She said, and offered him her arm. She offered him her arm. He was the king, and she offered him her arm as though she were escorting him into a theater she'd been to 100 times, and he was the one who needed guidance. It was so precisely, perfectly wrong that he took it without thinking. They walked into the vernal reception together. It took 4 minutes. 4 minutes for the entire court to decide that King Desmond Ironclaws had finally found his mate, that the courtship was real, that it was serious, and that someone should probably start thinking about the ceremony. Desmond had expected skepticism, whispered doubts, a slow campaign of public appearances building credibility over days. What he got was Petra Greer placing her hand on his forearm during a conversation with the Eastmarch delegation and saying, "He's being modest. The tariff reduction was his idea, not the council's." And the Eastmarch delegate's wife immediately leaning to the woman beside her and whispering, "She knows him." Because Petra did know him. She'd been watching the court since she was a child. She knew which policies were his and which were his council's. She knew which lords he tolerated and which he endured. She knew the precise tonal difference between his diplomatic agreement and his actual agreement, and when she responded to him in front of other people, she responded to the real one. She wasn't acting, she was just paying attention. And the court, which had spent years watching Faye struggle to engage with the politics Desmond lived inside, saw a woman who engaged without effort and drew the obvious conclusion. "She's extraordinary," Lord Carrick told Mott at the wine table. "Where's he been hiding her?" Mott, who had witnessed the entire book-behind-napkin negotiation and had already committed it to his memoir's opening chapter, said, "She's been in the back row, my lord." "All this time?" "All this time." Desmond, meanwhile, was drowning. Not in the performance. The performance was, and this was the part that was starting to concern him, not a performance at all. Petra talked to him between diplomatic clusters the way she'd talked to him at the feast. Directly, precisely, without the careful padding that most people wrapped around their words when addressing a king. She made him laugh once, properly, about the Eastmarch delegate's extremely optimistic toupee. And the laugh surprised him. It came out before he could shape it, low and real, and 3 people turned to look at him as though he'd shifted in the middle of the throne room. "People are staring," he said. "You laughed. Apparently that's unusual." "I laugh." "When?" He tried to think of a recent example and couldn't. This seemed like a failure on his part, and the fact that she'd identified it in under an hour seemed like a failure of a different and more personal kind. The Faye encounter happened at the midpoint of the evening. It wasn't planned. Faye and her mate were moving through the reception in the opposite direction, and the current of the crowd brought them together near the display of Spring Alliance gifts, a table of ceremonial objects that no one had ever wanted and everyone pretended to admire. Faye looked beautiful. She always had. She was gracious and warm, and her smile when she saw Desmond was genuine, which was somehow worse than if it had been hostile. "Desmond," she said, "you look well." "Faye," he managed the word evenly. His wolf didn't react. Brace was, for reasons Desmond was choosing not to examine, entirely uninterested in Faye Ashmore. The wolf's attention was locked on the woman standing beside him, tracking the micro-movements of her breathing. "And you must be—" Faye turned to Petra. "Petra Greer, Hugh Greer's daughter." Petra smiled. It was a real smile, not sharp, not territorial, not performing. Just warm. "It's nice to finally meet you properly. My father always spoke well of you." It was the most devastating thing she could have said, and she hadn't tried. She hadn't been generous to establish dominance or gracious to score a point. She was just being Petra. And Faye, who was politically astute enough to recognize both a performance and the absence of one, blinked. "She seems lovely," Faye told her mate as they moved on. Desmond heard it because wolf hearing was, as always, deeply inconvenient. He also heard the mate reply, "She seems like she doesn't care about any of this," and Faye's quiet, "Yes, that's what I mean." "She doesn't smell like competition," Brace noted about Faye. Then, turning his attention back to Petra, with the single-minded focus of an animal that has found the only relevant thing in a room of 200 people. She smells like rain again, and paper, and the ink thing. Why does she always smell like ink? Petra was a scholar's daughter who read books at feasts. The ink was self-explanatory. Brace did not care about explanations. Brace cared about the scent the way gravity cared about mass, not as an interest, but as a law. That went well, Petra said, watching Faze retreating back. You didn't have to be kind to her. I wasn't being kind, I was being accurate. My father does speak well of her. She was a good influence on court culture during your courtship. She was. You lost her because you treated her like an appointment, not because she was wrong. Desmond's chest went tight. Not his wolf, himself. The human part that still had the pride wound and hadn't expected to hear the diagnosis from the woman he'd hired to cover it. That's direct. You hired me for 2 weeks. Do you want me to spend them lying? Most people do. Most people aren't reading Chapter 12 of the most important historical analysis of Grey Peak founding treaties. I have places to be, Your Majesty. Honesty is faster. Mott materialized at Desmond's elbow. The Thornhaven ambassador would like a word. Also, Lady Brightmere has asked me 3 times whether the courtship is official and whether she should begin the ceremonial arrangements. What did you tell her? That I'm the captain of the guard, not the social secretary, and that if she asks me again, I'll assign her a security escort that follows her to the privy. And? She's asked the kitchen master instead. He's already pricing ceremonial cakes. Petra made a small sound. Desmond looked at her. She was pressing her lips together, and her eyes had gone bright, and she was, with visible effort, not laughing. Don't, he said. I'm not. You're about to. They're pricing cakes, Desmond. We've been publicly visible for 90 minutes and someone is pricing cakes. It was the first time she'd used his name. Not his title. His name. It landed somewhere in his chest and stayed there, warm and inconvenient. And Brace, the animal, the predator, the part of him that didn't understand diplomacy or pride wounds or fake courtships, pressed forward in his ribs like a dog leaning against a door it wanted opened. More, Brace said. That. More of that. On the other side of Petra's composure, behind the steady gray eyes and the unbothered carriage and the devastating honesty, something else was happening. Something she would not have named if asked. Loon, her wolf, drifted. Loon always drifted. Attention scattered across the room, cataloging exits and wine quality and the East March delegates' toupee and the specific way the Spring Alliance banners caught the air currents from the high windows. And then, occasionally, with the precision of a telescope snapping into focus, his hands. The way his hands had stilled when she touched his collar. Loon noticed. Loon filed it. Loon said nothing at all. On the walk back to her quarters, he'd insisted on escorting her, which was part of the performance, he said, though nobody was watching. Petra was quiet for a long time. She was thinking about the laugh. Not Loon. Not her wolf cataloging data. Petra herself, the human woman who had agreed to 2 weeks of free food and archive access, was thinking about the specific sound of Desmond Ironclaw's laughing genuinely, and what it had done to the inside of her chest. It had been low and surprised and real, and the people who'd turned to stare had looked at him like they'd never heard it before. And that thought, that she had drawn out something the entire court had never heard, sat in her ribs like a coal she hadn't asked for. She was also thinking about the East March delegate's wife, holding her hand and saying, "You are exactly what he needs." And the specific way that sentence had landed, which was not flattering but frightening. Because for approximately 2 seconds, Petra had wanted it to be true. 2 seconds. She'd timed it. 2 seconds of wanting something she had no business wanting. And then she'd put it away, neatly, the way she put everything away, and moved on to the next diplomatic cluster. She was very good at putting things away. She'd been doing it her whole life. "You don't laugh enough," she said. So you mentioned. It was a good laugh. The real one, about the toupee. You should do it more. His wolf pressed forward again. Desmond held steady. You were good tonight, he said. Better than good. I was adequate. The Thornhaven ambassador's wife threatened me on your behalf. That's beyond adequate. Ambassador Kirsten is excitable. Ambassador Kirsten has been in diplomatic service for 30 years and has never, to my knowledge, threatened a king for anyone. He paused. It was convincing. The whole thing. That's the point. I know, that's... He stopped. Whatever the sentence was, he didn't finish it.
But his stride shortened, just slightly, and he was quiet for the rest of the corridor. And Petra, who noticed everything, who had been trained since birth to read the silences of powerful men, understood that the sentence he hadn't finished was something close to, "That's the problem." It was too convincing. I can't tell where the act stops anymore. She understood it because she was having the same problem. Good night, Miss Greer. Good night, Your Majesty. She paused at her door. The archive pass arrived this morning, by the way. Your predecessor's filing system is a war crime. I'll add it to the list. She smiled, not the public one, not the Fey encounter one, but a private thing, quick and unguarded, aimed at him and gone before he could hold it, and closed the door. Inside her quarters, alone, she leaned her back against the wood and pressed her hand flat against her sternum, where the coal was still sitting. Stop it, she told herself. Not her wolf, herself. 2 weeks, archive access, free cakes, that's the scope. But her hand stayed on her chest, and the coal stayed warm, and she stood there longer than she should have. Desmond stood in the corridor. The stone was cold and the torches were low, and his wolf was so still that the silence in his chest felt like standing at the edge of something very high. Home, Brace said. No, Desmond thought. Transaction. The wolf didn't argue. It didn't need to. It had settled into something patient and certain and warm, the way a fire settles into coals. It could wait. It had always been able to wait. Mott was leaning against the far wall when Desmond turned. Not a word, Desmond said. Mott said nothing. His expression was the one he reserved for events that would receive their own chapter. Chapter 3. The Avalanche. The gifts started arriving on day 3. A hand-painted tea set from the Thornhaven delegation, congratulating His Majesty on his excellent judgment. A bolt of ceremonial silver fabric from Lady Brightmere. For the bonding gown, whenever Your Majesty's courtship is ready. A set of matching wolf pelt cloaks from Lord Carrick, which were both wildly inappropriate for a courtship that was 4 days old, and made of an exceptionally fine material that Petra ran her hand over 3 times before catching herself. You can keep them, Desmond said. They were in his study, where she had arrived for their second scheduled public outing, a diplomatic tea that neither of them wanted to attend, and found the gift table instead. I'm not keeping matching wolf pelt cloaks from a fake courtship. They're good cloaks. They're bonding cloaks. Lord Carrick has us married in his head. Lord Carrick has been trying to marry me off since I took the throne. He once suggested I court his niece, who was 17 and collected ceramic frogs. How old were you? 26. The frogs were extensive. Petra laughed. Not the suppressed sound from the reception, a real laugh, short and warm and unplanned, the kind of laugh that escapes before the person knows it's coming. She covered her mouth, but the damage was done. Desmond had heard it. Brace had heard it. His wolf shifted forward, not the aggressive press of the collar touch moment, but a slow, heavy lean, like an animal putting its full weight against something it wanted to be closer to, and not understanding why the wall was there. That sound, Brace said. It's a laugh. Again. The tea will be crowded, Petra said, pulling the conversation back to the schedule. She was good at that, redirecting before a silence could settle into something that meant more than silence.
Who should I stand with when you're pulled into the delegation conversations? Whoever is nearest. You'll know more about the politics than they will. I always do. That's not the question. The question is whether I should be charming accessible or charming untouchable. What's the difference? Charming accessible. I'm friendly, I circulate, I make your courtship look warm. Charming untouchable. I stay near you. I speak to fewer people. I make your courtship look serious. She paused. Charming untouchable is better for the Faye problem. Charming accessible is better for the political read. Desmond stared at her. She had, in 3 days, developed a more sophisticated communication strategy for his fake courtship than his actual advisors had produced for his last 3 treaty negotiations combined. You're frighteningly good at this, he said. I grew up watching your court from the back row. You learn things when nobody's watching you back. There was something underneath that, a flash of something old and settled, a wound that had been there so long it had become architecture. Desmond recognized it because he had his own version. The managed exterior, the careful composure, the gap between what people saw and what was actually there. Her version was different. His was a king performing ease. Hers was a woman performing invisibility. Charming accessible, he said. I'd rather the court like you than fear you. They can do both. I know. That's what worries me. The diplomatic tea was a disaster in the best possible way. Petra was, and Desmond was going to have to stop being surprised by this, magnificent. She moved through the Thornhaven and Eastmarch delegations with the ease of someone who had read every briefing paper her father had ever produced, which, it turned out, she had. She corrected the Eastmarch trade attaché's population figures gently enough that he thanked her for it. She complimented the Thornhaven ambassador's wife on her dialect, which led to a 20-minute conversation about regional pack traditions that somehow ended with the ambassador's wife holding Petra's hand and saying, "My dear, you are exactly what he needs." The ambassador's wife then found Desmond and told him the same thing, with the added observation that if he ruined this, she would consider it a personal affront to the Thornhaven alliance. I have been threatened by a diplomat's wife on your behalf, Desmond told Petra afterward. I want you to know that this has never happened in the history of this kingdom. Ambassador Kirsten is lovely. She thinks your economic policy is sound, but your interpersonal skills need work. She told you that? She implied it. I have her exact phrasing memorized if you'd like it. I would not. Maud appeared. He was carrying a leather folder, which meant something official had happened. The ceremonial planner has submitted a preliminary timeline, Mott said. Lady Brightmere approved it. The council has been notified. There is a tentative date. A tentative date for what? Your bonding ceremony, sire. 6 weeks from now. The invitations are being drafted. Desmond's vision narrowed. I did not authorize. Lady Brightmere believes your courtship of Miss Greer constitutes an implicit declaration of intent. She cited the 3rd precedent of Ironclaw's mating protocol, which states that any alpha king who publicly courts a she-wolf for more than 3 consecutive events has signaled readiness to bond. It has been 2 events. The feast counts, sire. Lady Brightmere counted the feast. Petra, who had been listening to this exchange with the focused stillness of someone watching a very good play, said, There's a protocol? There is an entire protocol, Mott confirmed. It was written in the 4th century. It has never been amended. It includes a section on the ceremonial selection of bonding linens that is, frankly, disturbingly specific. Petra pressed her hand over her mouth. Her eyes were bright. Her shoulders were shaking. Don't, Desmond said, for the 2nd time in 4 days. Bonding linens, Petra managed. Petra, there's a linen protocol. This is not. Desmond. She lowered her hand. She was grinning, full, uncontrolled, radiant. The kind of grin that rearranged her entire face and turned her from the composed observer in the back row into someone who looked like she'd been lit from inside. They are selecting your ceremonial sheets. His wolf hit him like a wall. Not pain, not aggression, just the full weight of Brace's attention collapsing onto a single point, her face, that grin, the light behind her eyes, and staying there. Brace didn't understand courtship protocols or bonding linens or fake arrangements. Brace understood. She is happy, and we are the reason, and this is the only thing in the world that matters. Desmond's eyes flashed gold, longer this time, 2 full seconds. Petra saw it. Her grin faded into something quieter, something watchful, and she looked at him the way she'd looked at his collar adjustment. Cataloging, filing, not pressing. Your eyes do that a lot around me, she said. It's a wolf thing. I know it's a wolf thing. I grew up in a pack. That particular wolf thing usually means something specific. It means my wolf is opinionated. About what? The honest answer. About you, about your laugh, about the way you smell like rain and ink and something I can't name. About the fact that he locked onto you the moment we shook hands and has not unlocked since. Sat in Desmond's throat like a stone. About bonding linens, he said. Petra watched him. Her wolf, Loon, surfaced briefly, a shimmer of calm awareness behind her gray eyes, and then submerged again, drifting, unhurried, knowing something and choosing, with the deliberate patience of deep water, not to say it yet. Okay, she said, about bonding linens. She let him have the lie. He knew she was letting him have it, and she knew he knew, and neither of them said anything about that either. The private moments started after the tea, not scheduled, not part of the arrangement. She came to the archive every morning. That was legitimate. That was the price of her cooperation. But she started staying later. And on the 4th evening, when the sun had dropped low enough to turn the archive's high windows into columns of amber light, Desmond walked into the north wing with a stack of council briefings he absolutely could have read in his study, and found her at the oak table surrounded by 800 years of territorial surveys with ink on her wrist and her shoes off under the table. She looked up. You don't have archive access. I'm the king. You're the king of the kingdom. This archive has its own jurisdiction. I checked. You checked whether I have access to my own archive? Your predecessor's filing system suggests nobody has had meaningful access in decades. I found a grain inventory from the 6th century filed under poetry. It's not poetry. I checked. He sat down across from her, not because the arrangement required it, not because anyone was watching, because the chair was there and she was there, and the amber light was doing something to the archive that made it feel like a place where you could say things without them counting. My briefings can wait, he said. They can't. You have the East March tariff review tomorrow. You've read my schedule? I've read your father's trade analysis, your grandfather's tariff structures, and the original East March Treaty of Cession. Your schedule was on the way. He stared at her. She stared back. Ink on her wrist, shoes off, completely unbothered by the fact that she'd just casually revealed a deeper understanding of his kingdom's trade policy than his own council had demonstrated in 3 years. You should be on the council, he said. Something shifted in her face, small, a flicker behind the composure, there and gone. Not offense, surprise. The specific surprise of a person who has been qualified for something for a very long time and has never once been asked. I'm the advisor's daughter, she said. Not the advisor. That's not an answer. It is, actually. It's just not the one you want. They looked at each other across the oak table. The amber light was fading. The archive was going gold to gray, and in the shift between colors there was a moment, brief, unstructured, not part of any arrangement, where neither of them had a reason to be here except that they wanted to be. She broke it first, turned back to the surveys. Tell me the worst diplomatic dinner you've ever survived. I need something to balance this grain inventory or I'll lose my mind. Ashenmere delegation, fishing rights dispute. Their alpha shifted at the table and put his paw through the soup tureen. No. The soup was bisque. The tureen was a gift from the Thornhaven delegation. The bisque was on everyone. What did you do? I ate my bread and pretended nothing was happening. The bread had bisque on it. I ate bisque bread. For diplomacy. She laughed, the real one, the warm one, the one that escaped before she could manage it, and then said, "Mine was the visiting dignitary who spent 3 hours explaining wolf pack theory to me, the daughter of the senior pack advisor, as though I'd never heard of a wolf." "What did you do?" "I let him finish. Then I asked one question about subordinate pack bonds that revealed his entire thesis was based on a mistranslation, and he didn't speak to me for the rest of the evening." "What was the mistranslation?" "He'd confused the old Grey Peak word for loyalty with the word for furniture. His paper essentially argued that pack bonds were based on a shared commitment to quality seating." Desmond laughed, the real one, the low, unplanned one that she kept drawing out of him, and she watched it happen, and this time she did not quickly contain what moved behind her eyes. This time she let it sit there, warm, startled, visible, for a full 3 seconds before she looked down at the surveys. 3 seconds. She'd have said it was less if anyone asked. It was 3. "You have ink on your wrist," he said. "I know. And on your jaw." Her hand went to her jaw. He reached across the table, not thinking, not deciding, just reaching, and his thumb brushed the ink mark on the edge of her jawline. Light, brief. The pad of his thumb against the curve of bone, and then he pulled back, and the silence that followed was the kind of silence that has a heartbeat in it. Petra's breath had stopped. Not hitched, stopped. A full cessation of breathing for 1 beat, 2, and then a careful, controlled inhale that she treated like a diplomatic exercise. His eyes had gone gold. She watched them come back. She watched his hand return to the table and go still. She wanted to lean forward. She wanted it with her whole body, not her wolf, herself, the human woman sitting shoeless in an archive with ink on her jaw, and a coal in her chest that had been burning since the first reception and was now, with the ghost of his thumb on her skin, producing actual heat. She did not lean forward. She picked up a survey and said, "This one's filed under livestock. It's a love poem." "How can you tell?" "The 3rd line mentions the moon 4 times and livestock 0 times. Even the 6th century had standards." He laughed again, quieter. His hand was still. Her jaw still felt warm where he touched it. The archive was fully gray now, and the candles hadn't been lit, and they were sitting in the dark talking about love poems filed under livestock, and neither of them moved to leave. The 5th day. The Treaty Summit Preparation Dinner. Formal, crowded, the kind of event where every conversation was a negotiation and every glass of wine was a political statement. Faye found Petra alone near the garden terrace. Desmond wasn't there. He was across the hall with the East March delegation, but his hearing caught it, the shift in Petra's heartbeat, the subtle change in her scent that meant her attention had sharpened. "You're good with him," Faye said. She wasn't hostile, she wasn't performing. She was standing in the terrace doorway with her wine and looking at Petra with the clear, kind directness of a woman who had moved on and could afford to be honest. "It's not difficult," Petra said. "It is, actually. He makes it look simple because he's learned how to manage people's expectations of him. But the real Desmond, the one underneath the managed version, is harder to reach than he lets on." "I've noticed," Faye tilted her head. "I spent 2 years learning which version of him was real. You don't forget that." She paused. "He's not performing with you. I watched him tonight. He stopped performing about 20 minutes in." Petra said nothing. "I know what his performing looks like," Faye continued. "I saw it every day for 2 years. The careful voice, the measured responses, the way he holds his goblet when he's thinking about something else. He's not doing any of that with you. He's just there." The terrace was quiet. The garden beyond it was dark and smelled like wet stone and night-blooming jasmine, and Petra stood in the doorway with a woman who had loved the same man and was telling her, gently and without agenda, that the thing Petra had been telling herself was fake was the realest thing in the room. Petra already knew. Not Loon. Petra. She had known since the archive, since his thumb on her jaw, since the silence that had a heartbeat, since she'd sat in the dark with him and not moved to leave. She had known, and she had done what she always did with things that threatened her careful invisibility. She had filed it, shelved it, treated it as information rather than feeling. But the feeling was still there, under the filing, under the composure, under every rational argument about 2 weeks and archive access and the sensible scope of professional courtesy. A coal in her chest, burning steady, getting worse. Loon surfaced, not to tell her something she didn't know, but to confirm what she'd been avoiding. "You know," Loon said, not a question, a fact, held out in the silence between them. "He's a good king," she said to Faye. "That's all." Faye smiled. It was sad and knowing and free of malice, the smile of someone who recognized an avoidance pattern because she'd lived inside one. "That's never all," she said, and went back inside. Petra stood alone on the terrace. The coal burned. She let it. Chapter 4. The Exposure. It was Lady Brightmere's assistant who heard it. Not through malice. That would have been easier to navigate. Through proximity. The assistant, a fastidious beta named Welton who lived for administrative precision, had been in the North Wing corridor filing ceremonial correspondence for the bonding ceremony timeline. The archive door was open. Petra and Desmond were at the oak table, comfortable, guard down, sitting in the easy silence of 2 people who had stopped monitoring the distance between them. Petra was reading aloud from the First Alpha's territorial survey. She paused, looked up, smiled, the private one, aimed at him. "Remind me," she said, "after the summit, do we just stop showing up together? Or is there some kind of graceful exit strategy for a fate courtship?" She said it lightly, joking, the tone of a woman who was still telling herself this had an expiration date, even as she sat in his archive wearing the wolf pelt cloak she'd said she wasn't keeping. Welton, in the corridor, stopped walking. Fake courtship. He brought it to Mott first, to his credit. Mott brought it to Desmond before anyone else heard, to his credit. Desmond was still in the archive when Mott appeared in the doorway. His voice was flat. Flatter than usual, the kind of flat that meant something structural had failed. "Sire, a word." Desmond looked up, read Mott's expression, stood. "What?" "Welton, Brightmere's assistant. He was in the North Wing corridor. He heard Miss Greer's comment about the arrangement. He hasn't told Brightmere yet, but he will. He's not the kind of man who keeps information. He's the kind of man who routes it to the correct authority. And the correct authority for bonding ceremony matters is Lady Brightmere. Stop him. I can delay him. I cannot stop a man who believes he's performing his civic duty. He thinks you've been deceived, sire. He thinks Miss Greer engineered the arrangement to gain access to the archive." The words landed like stones in water. Petra had gone still. Not the composed stillness she wore at court. A different kind, the stillness of someone who has just heard her own words played back to her, and is calculating with the speed of a woman raised in politics exactly how much damage they will do and to whom. "I said that," she said. Quiet, not a question. The recognition of a woman who had been comfortable enough to joke, and was now watching the joke become the detonation. It won't matter that it was a joke. The court will read it as the advisor's daughter leveraging a fake courtship to access restricted archives. Yes, I can see the shape of it. She stood. Her movements were careful and controlled. The way a person moves when they know that if they move too fast, something inside them will crack. My father's position. It wasn't a question, she was already there. Already past the personal humiliation. Already at the structural damage. Hugh Greer had served the Ironclaw's throne for 23 years. His daughter exposed as the king's prop in a scheme driven by a bruised ego would not just embarrass Hugh. It would reframe every piece of advice he'd ever given as potentially self-serving. The court would wonder what else the Greers had arranged. What other access they'd negotiated. What other positions had been purchased rather than earned. 23 years of loyalty, reduced to a question mark by one overheard sentence in a corridor. I'll fix this, Desmond said. How? I'll tell the court the arrangement was my idea. My initiative. You were. What? Coerced? Bribed? Deceived? Her voice was still even, still controlled. That was the worst part. The precision of her composure. The absolute refusal to give him the relief of seeing her break. Which version damages my father less? Because all of them damage my father. Petra. This was supposed to be 2 weeks. She picked up her research papers from the oak table, stacked them neatly, aligned the edges. 2 weeks of standing next to you at parties and being unimpressed for your entertainment. That was the scope. I did not agree to. She stopped. Not because she ran out of words, because the next words were ones she was not willing to say in front of him. I did not agree to this being real. I did not agree to your eyes going gold every time I touched you. I did not agree to liking the way you laugh. Loon was silent. Completely, utterly silent. Not drifting. Not circling. Gone still the way deep water goes still before it freezes. Surface calm, everything underneath locked in place. I'll handle the council, Desmond said. His voice was the managed one. The king voice. The one she'd told him, 5 days ago, that he used to keep people at a distance. He heard himself doing it and couldn't stop. I'll ensure your father's position is. Don't manage me. The words were quiet, sharp enough to cut glass. I'm not the court. I'm not a delegation. I'm not a problem you can solve with the right political maneuver. She held the papers against her chest. I'm the woman who agreed to a 2-week arrangement and watched it become something neither of us planned. And I am asking you not to manage me right now. Brace was frantic.
Not the patient predator, not the calm tracker. Frantic, the animal in him lunging against the inside of his chest, pushing forward with a force that made his hands shake. Not toward her, toward the space between them, toward the gap that was opening, that she was opening, that he could feel widening with every second she stood there being composed instead of angry. Her composure was worse than anger. Anger he could have fought. Composure meant she'd already decided. I'm going to my father, she said. He should hear this from me. Let me come with. No. One word. The door between them closed with the quietest click he'd ever heard. She left. The archive was empty. The oak table had a single ring from her tea mug, still warm. Brace stood at the edge of Desmond's awareness and made a sound that wasn't a growl or a whine, but something between. The sound of an animal that had been tracking something and lost it and didn't understand, lost. Where? The word wasn't frantic, it was confused. Brace didn't understand gone. Brace understood here and closer and her and stay. And the sudden absence of her scent in the room was a blank space in the wolf's map of the world. Where did she go? Desmond sat down in the chair she'd been sitting in. It was still warm. Mott was in the doorway. The damage, Desmond said. Welton has spoken to Brightmere. Brightmere is shocked and, frankly, delighted. This is the most interesting thing that's happened to her since the fishing rights crisis. She will have informed 6 people by sundown. The council will know by morning. And Hugh. Hugh Greer has served the throne since before you were crowned. He's survived 4 political crises, 2 attempted coups, and the great grain debate of '09. He'll survive this. Mott paused. His daughter's standing is a different question. The court will be less forgiving of her than of you. You're the king. She's the woman who took your archive access and your arm. She took my archive access because I offered it. That's not the story the court will tell. Desmond was quiet. Mott was quiet. The archive was quiet in the specific way that a room is quiet when someone important has just left it. For what it's worth, Mott said, I had the bonding ceremony chapter outlined. It was going to be the emotional climax of the memoir. Mott. I'm just saying, you've cost me a denouement, sire. It wasn't funny. It was not even slightly funny. Desmond almost laughed anyway.
the desperate, hollow kind that comes when the alternative is sitting in an empty archive, staring at a tea ring, and understanding, with full clarity, the exact shape of what you've just lost. He didn't laugh, but the almost was there, and it was the most human thing in the room. Desmond stared at the tea ring on the oak table. It was perfectly round. She had set her mug down in exactly the same spot every morning for a week, and the ring was proof. A small, precise mark that said, "I was here, I was real. I sat in this chair and drank tea and read treaties, and none of it was fake." None of it had been fake. That was the thing he was only now understanding, with the full weight of a man who has been running a scheme and just discovered that the scheme was the only lie in the room. He had not been performing with her. Faye had seen it. The court had seen it. Mott had seen it from the first night. And he had stood in the wreckage of his own arrangement and used his king voice on the woman who had laughed at his jokes and fixed his collar and told him the truth when everyone else wrapped it in linen. Her, Brace said. Quiet now. Not confused anymore. Certain, the way an animal is certain about water. The way gravity is certain about down. Her. Always her. The court found out by morning. The whispers started at breakfast, escalated by lunch, and by the time the Treaty Summit's opening session convened, the story had been told so many times it had developed its own mythology. The advisor's daughter had tricked the king. No, the king had used the advisor's daughter. No, they'd conspired together to manipulate the court. Petra's exact words were repeated, paraphrased, embroidered, stripped of context and tone until the joke became a confession. Lady Brightmere, who had spent 4 days happily planning a bonding ceremony, felt personally betrayed and made this known to everyone within earshot, which was everyone. Hugh Greer sat in the council chamber and said nothing. He had been in politics long enough to know that the first person to speak in a crisis owns the narrative, and the second person to speak is defending against it. He waited. Petra did not attend the summit. She did not attend anything. She stayed in her quarters, and when Desmond sent a message through Mott, she sent back a single line. The archive pass is on the table. I won't be using it. Brace pressed against Desmond's sternum all day, not asking, not confused, just present and pointed and waiting. Patient predator. It could wait. It had always been able to wait. But Desmond, the human, the king, the man who had confused a pride wound for the problem and missed the real wound opening right in front of him, could not. Chapter 5. The Real Thing. The first thing Desmond did was not go to Petra. This was, Mott observed later, the first intelligent decision the king had made in 2 weeks. Because the first thing Desmond did, before the summit's second session, before the court had finished chewing on the scandal, before he allowed himself to think about the tea ring on the oak table, was walk into the council chamber and sit down across from Hugh Greer. Hugh was older than Desmond remembered. Not frail, Hugh Greer would never be frail, but weathered. 23 years of advising kings had worn grooves into his face that looked like patience and were probably exhaustion. He looked at Desmond with the steady, unsurprised expression of a man who had watched a great many powerful people make a great many stupid decisions and had long since stopped being disappointed by it. Hugh. Your Majesty. I owe you an account of what happened. You owe me nothing, sire. I've been briefed. Not by me. Hugh waited. This was his gift, the silence that invited truth. Desmond understood, suddenly, where Petra had gotten it. I arranged the courtship to manage the political embarrassment of Faye's new pairing, Desmond said. The words were flat and plain and cost him more than any treaty negotiation in his reign. I asked your daughter to participate because she was available, appropriate, and unlikely to develop expectations. I offered her archive access in exchange. The arrangement was entirely my design, entirely my initiative, and your daughter's participation was a professional courtesy to her king, not a scheme. And what was it to you? Hugh said. I'm sorry? You said it was a professional courtesy on her part. What was it on yours? Desmond's hands were on the table. They were still. He noticed this, the stillness that Petra had noticed, that she'd catalogued and filed and never pressed, and for the first time, he didn't suppress it. He let his hands be still and let Hugh see them, and let the silence mean what it meant. It stopped being an arrangement very quickly, Desmond said. Hugh nodded, slowly, the way a man nods when he's heard what he expected and is deciding how much of his reaction to show. My daughter, Hugh said, has spent her life in the back row of this court. She is the most politically gifted person in this kingdom, and no one has ever asked her a question that wasn't about my trade proposals. She is invisible by habit, not by nature, and you chose her for an arrangement because she was convenient. Each word was precise and heavy, and landed exactly where Hugh intended it to land. I did. And then you made her visible. For the first time in her life, this court saw her. They saw her and they were impressed. And now the story is that it was all a trick. That's the story I'm here to correct. How? Your position on the council is not going to change. I will address the council directly, not through channels, not through Mott, and make clear that the arrangement was my failing, that your family had no knowledge of the scheme, and that your advisory record stands on 23 years of service that I will not allow to be questioned. Hugh studied him. And my daughter? That's separate. It is not separate. My daughter is the only person in this building whose standing you damaged, and she is the one person you cannot fix with a council address. Hugh leaned forward. You want to protect my position. Fine, I accept. But Petra is not a political problem, Desmond. She is a person who trusted you with her visibility, and you made that visibility a joke. It was the first time Hugh had used his name. 23 years of Your Majesty and Sire, and the man chose now, in the middle of the worst conversation of Desmond's reign, to call him by his name. It landed the same way it had when Petra did it, like a wall removed, like being seen by someone who had been watching from the back row for a very long time. I know, Desmond said. Then you know that whatever you do next can't be another performance. Desmond addressed the council that afternoon. He did not use the managed voice. He did not perform composure or shape the narrative or deploy the careful political framing that his training had given him. He stood in front of 12 councillors and 2 foreign delegations and Lady Brightmere and said, The courtship between myself and Petra Greer began as an arrangement. I initiated it to manage a personal embarrassment. Miss Greer agreed as a courtesy to her king. The arrangement was mine. The failing was mine. Hugh Greer had no knowledge of it, and I am instructing this council that any questioning of Advisor Greer's record or loyalty on the basis of my personal decisions will be treated as a direct challenge to the throne. The council chamber was silent. Not the polite silence of agreement. The stunned silence of a room full of political operators who had just watched a king publicly claim a personal failing without hedging, deflecting, or blaming. Lady Brightmere opened her mouth. Mott gave her a look. She closed it. That will be all, Desmond said, and left. Mott fell into step beside him in the corridor. The bonding ceremony timeline has been cancelled. Lady Brightmere is inconsolable. The linen suppliers are reportedly furious. Good. She did ask me to tell you that the deposit on the ceremonial napkins is non-refundable. I'll survive the napkin loss. I thought you might. I'll add it to the list of things you've handled with characteristic grace this week. Desmond looked at him. Mott looked back. 11 years of service and the man's face was a locked door. Was that sarcasm? Desmond said. I'm the captain of the guard, sire. I don't have opinions. The second thing took longer. He waited 2 days. This was strategic but not calculated. He needed Petra to hear about the council address from someone other than him. He needed the correction to exist independently of any attempt to win her back. He needed the political act to be clean before the personal one could begin. On the second day, Mott told him Petra had been seen in the north wing. Not the archive, the corridor outside it, walking past the door without going in. Desmond went to the archive. He did not dress as the king. He wore a plain shirt, no insignia, no house colors. He left the Ironclaw's ring in his chambers.
He walked through the north wing as a man with no title and sat down at the oak table where the tea ring was still visible and waited. She came at dusk. He heard her footsteps first, the specific sound of Petra Greer's particular gait, which was unhurried and precise and sounded the way her speech sounded, each step landing where she intended it. She rounded the corner into the archive and stopped. He was sitting in her chair, the one she'd used every morning, the one where the tea ring was. "That's my chair," she said. "I know. You're in my chair, and you're not wearing your crown. I don't own a crown. The Ironclaw's sigil is an armband. You're not wearing your armband." "No." She stood in the doorway. The last light from the high windows caught her face, and her expression was the one he'd seen on the terrace at the preparation dinner. Not composed, not strategic. Not the invisible woman or the political reader or the advisor's daughter. Just Petra, tired and wary and not quite willing to leave. "I heard about the council," she said. "Good. It was well handled. It was the minimum. Most kings would consider it the maximum. Most kings didn't earn the mess." She was quiet. Loon, drifting, always drifting, surfaced just enough that her eyes caught a sheen of something pale and calm. Not gold like his. Silver, the color of moonlight on still water. "Why are you in my chair, Desmond?" "Because I am not here as your king." He said it without the managed voice, without the careful framing, without any of the architecture he'd spent his reign building between himself and the world. "I am here as the man who sat across from you for a week and watched you read founding treaties and correct ambassadors and laugh at my jokes and fix my collar, and who told himself it was a transaction, because admitting it was something else would have meant admitting that the whole arrangement, the scheme, the performance, the Faye problem, was a lie I was telling myself, so I wouldn't have to say what my wolf knew from the first night." Brace was still. Not the predator still, not the tracking still, the kind of still that comes at the end of a long hunt when the animal has arrived at the place it was always going and has nothing left to do but stand there and be present. "Your wolf," Petra said. "The eye thing. The eye thing. From the first night, from the moment you didn't curtsy." Something cracked in her composure. Not dramatically, not a sob or a break or a collapse. A fracture. The kind of crack that appears in ice when the temperature shifts just enough. A single line that runs from one edge to the other and changes the structural integrity of everything above it. "I was reading," she said. "You interrupted chapter 9. "I know. And then you made chapter 9 significantly less interesting than the alternative, which I resent." "That's fair." "It is." She paused. "Why are you really here, Desmond?" He leaned forward. His hands were on the table. Still, the way they always were with her, the way she'd noticed and filed and never pressed. "I chose you because you were convenient. That's the truth, and it's an ugly one, and you deserve to hear me say it plainly instead of watching me manage my way around it. The arrangement was shallow, and the reason was shallow, and you were worth more than either, and I knew that by the second evening. And I didn't say so because saying so would have meant the performance was over. And I wasn't ready for the performance to be over." He held her gaze. "Not because of Faye, because of you. Because the performance was the only reason I got to sit across from you every day, and I was afraid that if I told the truth, you'd leave. So instead I got to leave because of a scandal. Much better. I didn't say it was a good plan. I said it was the truth." Petra's eyes were bright. Not tears, she was not crying. Brightness. The sheen of emotion held at the surface by force of will, present and visible and not falling. Loon surfaced, not drifting, not circling, present. Close to the surface in a way that Petra hadn't allowed since the terrace, since Faye's quiet observation, since the moment she'd known and chosen not to name it. "His hands," Loon said, quiet, calm. The first word since the exposure. "They're doing the still thing." "I know." They only do that for us. Petra didn't answer her wolf. She looked at Desmond's hands on the table. She looked at his face. She looked at the space where the king usually was and found, instead, a man who had come without his title and sat in her chair and was telling her the truth with his hands perfectly still and his eyes threatening gold, and nothing managed about him. "The archive pass," she said, "is yours, regardless. That restriction was always wrong, and I've removed it permanently. It has nothing to do with this." The council address would have happened whether or not I ever sat in this chair. And this, right now, what is this? He looked at her. His eyes were gold. Not a flash, not a slip. A sustained, deliberate surrender to the animal in him that had known from the first night and waited. Patient predator, patient as gravity, for the human to catch up. "This is the real thing," he said. Everything else was the performance. Petra stood in the doorway for a long time, long enough for the light to change, long enough for the archive to go dim and gold, the last sun catching dust motes in the air between them like something suspended. Then she crossed the room, sat in the chair opposite his, not her chair, the other one, the one he'd been sitting in all week, and pulled the oak table's single surviving artifact toward her. The treaty she'd been reading the last morning, the one about the first Alpha's border negotiations, the one with the handwritten marginalia that might or might not contain a love letter. "Chapter 14, she said. "The first Alpha's cartographer found a passage that describes the marking ceremony. It's not what anyone expected." "What is it?" "It's quiet. No witnesses. No ceremony." He took her to the border of the territory he'd built and said, "This is yours. All of it. I built it, and it's yours." And she bit him. Petra looked up. Not the other way around. She marked him. He asked her to. The archive was silent. The dust motes drifted. Brace was so still that Desmond could feel the wolf's heartbeat synchronized with his own. One rhythm, one body, one animal certainty that had never wavered. "Petra." "Desmond. I would like this to not be an arrangement." It stopped being an arrangement on day 2. I was just better at the performance than you were. He laughed, the real one, the low, unplanned, genuine one that she'd been pulling out of him all week, and she smiled. The private one, the quick, unguarded one, the one that was aimed at him and meant for him, and was not a performance and never had been. She stood up, walked around the table. He turned in his chair to face her, and she was close, closer than protocol, closer than arrangement. Close enough that Brace could feel the warmth of her, and Loon could feel the answering warmth of him, and neither wolf said anything because there was nothing left to say. Petra put her hand on his collar, the same spot, the same gesture. This time, she didn't adjust it. She just rested her hand there, fingers against the fabric, against the pulse in his throat that was rapid and real and completely unmanaged. "Your eyes are doing it again," she said. "I know. I like it." Her wolf surfaced, not a shimmer, not a drift, but fully present, silver bright behind her gray eyes, and Loon looked at Brace through Petra's gaze with the calm, knowing patience of deep water finally arriving at shore. "His hands," Loon said, one final time. And then, nothing, just presence. Just the warm, still, certain fact of being exactly where she was supposed to be. He turned his head, pressed his mouth to her palm. She felt his breath there, warm and unsteady, and then his lips at her wrist, and then his teeth. Not biting, not yet, just the pressure of them, the promise, against the place where her pulse met his mouth. "Ask me," she said. "Stay." "That's not a question." "Stay?" She laughed. Quiet, warm, hers. "Yes." The marking happened at the border. Not the kingdom's border, the archives. The threshold of the North Wing, where restricted met unrestricted, where the line between accessible and closed had been drawn for decades, and had just, by royal decree, been erased. It was quiet, no witnesses, no ceremony. He took her to the doorway and said, "This is yours, all of it. The archive,
the access, the threshold. Yours. And she bit him. Not gently, not performatively. The real thing, teeth at the junction of his neck and shoulder, the place where the bond seals. And Brace surged forward and Desmond let him, and the gold in his eyes stayed and stayed and stayed. Finally, Brace said. One word. The only word the wolf had ever needed. Petra pulled back, looked at him. The mark was already reddening on his skin, visible, permanent, hers. Your turn, she said. He was gentle. More gentle than the animal in him wanted to be. Brace, who had waited with the patience of a predator who always knew it would arrive here, pressed forward with a force that Desmond translated into care. His mouth at her neck, his teeth finding the place. The sound she made, small, sharp, real. And the bond snapping into place between them like a door opening in a wall that had always been there. Lune, serene, drifting, knowing Lune, broke open. Not scattered, not evasive, not circling the detail she wouldn't name. Open, present. Every held thing released at once, like a held breath, like a tide allowed to move. Home, Lune said. First word, last word, the only one that mattered. They stood in the threshold of the archive, marked and bonded and breathing each other's air. And Desmond, who had started this with a pride wound and a scheme and one overheard sentence in a corridor, held the woman who had agreed to 2 weeks because she was bored and found, instead, the rest of his life. We should tell the court, he said. The court has been planning our bonding ceremony for a week and a half. They're ahead of us. Lady Brightmere is going to be unbearable. Lady Brightmere was right. She just had bad intel on the timeline. He kissed her, not at the bond point, on the mouth, properly. The kind of kiss that had nothing to do with arrangements or performances, or the vernal court reception, or the political optics of anything. Just a kiss, in a dim archive, between two people who had been pretending and had run out of pretend. Brace settled, deep and warm and done. The hunt was over. The predator had become the companion, and the companion was home. The third thing was public. The Treaty Summit's closing ceremony. The whole court. Both foreign delegations. Lady Brightmere in the front row with a handkerchief already in hand because she had heard the rumor and had chosen to believe it. Desmond walked in with Petra, not beside her, not escorting her, with her. Side by side, her hand in his. His mark visible at his collar. He'd worn a shirt that did not cover it, which was a sartorial choice that the court would be discussing for approximately the next 40 years. He did not make a speech. He did not address the room. He did not explain or justify or narrate. He sat at the treaty table. Petra sat beside him. He turned to the East March delegation and said, "Shall we begin?" And the ambassador, who had eyes and a functional understanding of mate marks, said, "Congratulations, Your Majesty." And Desmond said, "Thank you." Now, about the tariff structure. And that was it. The realest thing he'd ever done in the most public room in the kingdom. Delivered with the absolute minimum of ceremony. Because the performance was over, and what was left was just the truth. Petra caught his eye once during the proceedings. She was correcting the Thornhaven ambassador's population figures again. Gently, accurately, with the focused competence of a woman who had been reading briefing papers since she could read. And she looked at him, and he looked at her. And the look lasted exactly 1 second, and contained approximately everything. Mott stood at the back of the room. His expression had not changed. It existed in the narrow band between professionally neutral and the memoir is going to be excellent. Hugh Greer sat in his usual council seat. He watched his daughter correct an ambassador, field a trade question, and rest her hand, briefly, casually, as though it were the most natural gesture in the world, on the king's arm. He nodded. Once. The kind of nod that takes 23 years to earn. Faye Ashmore and her mate left the summit early, not in distress, in contentment. She squeezed her mate's hand as they walked through the great doors, and her mate leaned down and said something that made her laugh, and they left, and nobody watched them go except Petra, who watched for exactly the length of time it took to confirm that Faye was happy, and then turned back to the tariff discussion, with the satisfied expression of a woman whose intelligence had better things to focus on. Epilogue. The archive stayed open. The restricted access designation was removed by royal decree, and the founding treaties were made available to any scholar with a legitimate research interest, which turned out to be a great many people and absolutely infuriated the previous filing system. Petra spent 3 weeks cataloging the collection. She found the first alpha's love letter. It was, as the marginalia suggested, a marking account. It was also, as it turned out, a cartographic survey in which the first alpha had literally mapped his territory with annotations that were, upon closer reading, not about borders at all. He labeled the river where they met as the place where the water knew before I did, Petra told Desmond, reading from the survey in their bed. Their bed, the king's bed, which she had moved into with the unhurried efficiency of a woman who had decided and did not require a ceremony to confirm it. And the mountain where he built the first den is labeled here because she liked the view. He built the kingdom around her preferences? He built the kingdom around her preferences. Desmond looked at the ceiling. Brace was warm and still and home. I should probably rename the archive, he said. If you name it after me, I will divorce you. We're not married. I will find a way. Mott knocked, entered, held up a leather folder. The bonding ceremony. Lady Brightmere's revised timeline. She has moved the date up by 2 weeks on the grounds that, he consulted the folder, the king has clearly made his intentions known, and further delay is an insult to protocol and to the ceremonial linen suppliers who have been on standby since Thursday. Petra put the founding survey down, looked at Desmond. The private smile, the quick one, the real one, aimed at him. Bonding linens, she said. Don't. Desmond. I know. They've been on standby since Thursday. He laughed. The real one. Hers. Always hers. Mott closed the folder. His expression, for the first time in 11 years of service, broke. Not a smile. Not quite. But the muscles around his eyes shifted in a way that, in better light, from a more generous angle, might have been something close. I'll tell Brightmere to proceed, Mott said. You'll tell Brightmere the king and his mate will review the timeline at their convenience, Desmond said. And when will that be, sire? Petra turned a page. After chapter 14. Mott left, the door closed. The archive survey rustled in the draft from the window. Outside, the Grey Peak Mountains caught the last of the light, gold and iron and the deep, patient gray that gave the Dominion its name. Brace settled. Lune drifted, but not away. Around, the easy, unhurried orbit of a moon that has found its planet and will not be moved. Home, they said, both of them, at the same time in different registers, meaning the same thing. Home.